From the 1960s until today, some scientists have made amazing claims of sensory capabilities and high level of intelligence possessed by plants. Their findings raise questions about what it means to be smart and defines what is conscience. Professor Stefano Mancuso of the International Laboratory on Plant Neurobiology at the University of Florence told the BBC this month a special intelligence exploration in plants. He said, "We are convinced that the plants are cognitive and intelligent, so we use techniques and methods normally used to study cognitive animals." He experimented with 2 bean vines. The plants were set to compete for a post. The losing felt the other plant had reached the near post, and began looking for an alternative. It shows that plants were aware of their physical environment and the behavior of the other plant, Mancuso said. In animals we call this consciousness. Bean plants a sense of community. Suzanne Simard, professor of ecology at the University of British Columbia, told the BBC had not dealt with plants, meaning that are also consenting beings. She experienced in the company of Douglas fir trees, and found that they could recognize their own relatives when they grow up in a neighborhood between foreign and acquaintances. The trees also seem to be able to feel when they are dying, and release carbon into the neighboring pines. My interpretation was that the Douglas fir knew he was dying, and wanted to spend his legacy carbon his neighbor, because that would be beneficial for fungi associated with the community, Simard said. Learning long-term memory. Last year, Dr. Monica Gagliano at the University of Western Australia published a study in the journal Ecologia, examining the long memory of plants. Mimosa pudica she planted in pots on the foam cushion from a height that would scare plants but without harming them. She was able to control his reactions, and found that plants finally learned how to fall without hurting themselves. Learn what plants retain their long-term memory. But these behaviors conceptualize intelligence? Professor Daniel Chermovitz, Dean of Science at Tel Aviv University and author of What a Plant Knows, told the BBC, "We could see on Venus flytrap leaves his closing capacity. It could then be defined as intelligence, but that does not help at all in understanding the biology of the plant. We must be very clear about the terminology. Emotions and supersensory capabilities. The plants seem to register emotional responses, when in 1966 the late Cleve Baxter checked using a polygraph. Baxter was a former specialist using the polygraph SIA developed with the common polygraph techniques that still used in the United States military and government agencies. He conducted an experiment on the dragon Dracaena pod detailed in the book The Secret Life of Plants. Cleve Baxter began his experiments with plant Dracaena. For example, there were 2 plants Dracaena and one of them hit a polygraph. A person stopped to the other plant. While this action was carried out, the polygraph showed that the witness Passat N plant caused fear. Marcel Vogel continued experiments and exposed Baxter that plants appeared to be affected by thoughts. Vogel was a senior scientist at IBM for 27 years, during which time more than 100 patented inventions. Partly through his career he was interested in a more organic application for their scientific knowledge. He tried the electrical currents emitted by plants. He found that plants respond dramatically when he pressed his breath, and kept one thought in his mind, comparing when your mind is clear and your breathing is slow. His former associate Dan Willis on its website Marcel Vogel Org Experiments Vogel explained. Willis wrote, "The responsiveness of plants to thought was also the same regardless of whether it is 8 inches, 8 feet or 8,000 miles, as tested in Prague, Czechoslovakia, and his laboratory in San Jose, where he was able to affect the plant connected to the recorder."